Hope you all have had a good afternoon. I have decided, inasmuch as I've not really addressed the subject here yet in a direct way at Willette, that I should preach on the subject of sin tonight. Inasmuch as I should let you know I've decided to come out again it. And I believe this is an important thing to do, but in all seriousness, it is good to be able to label things for what they are. If you don't have a label, it can be one of the most frustrating things that you've ever imagined in your life. Labels are good. Labels are needed. Have you ever tried to shop for something and they did not put a label on it? You don't know how much it is. Isn't that awful when you have to drag it off to somebody over there at the counter or something, or try to find one of those little scanning machines and be able to figure out how much this item is? It's a terrible thing not to have a label because you need to identify things. People put labels on everything anymore except for sin. Did you know, way up in the Nordic countries, y'all know Sweden, the Sweden, those, those guys. They are even putting barcodes on the sides of their battleships. Yeah, they're labeling everything up there. You know why they put them on the sides of the battleships? Because that's how you get to Scandinavia. No? You need labels. That's my point. You need labels. If you didn't get that one, ask your loved one later. Okay. I want you to know that we are here tonight definitely to label sin. Now, I say a little levity at the beginning of this because the subject's pretty heavy, isn't it? So you need that a little bit in order to get into it. But seriously, if you're going to deal with sin, since it builds on itself and little things become big things, then you need to make sure that you deal with it early on. God is a very patient God. He's not going to strike you down just because you started sinning. You say, well, I did something and nobody caught me. Yeah, God caught it. Nobody gets away with anything. Well, I did something and I didn't see any bad consequences of it. The consequences may come later. In Genesis chapter 15 and verse 16, I skipped over this prophecy with you all who are in the auditorium class on Sunday mornings. I just plumb skipped it. Well, we're not going to skip it now. The Bible says in Genesis 15 verse 16 that the Israelites, the children of Abraham, would come back in the fourth generation. Well, God, what are they going to do when they come back in the fourth generation? Why are you waiting so long for them to come back? Well, they got to populate themselves down in Egypt. But the other reason, and the reason he gives right here in Genesis 15:16, is at the end of that verse, he says, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full. What did he mean by that? He mean the Amorites had started sinning, and they were not repentant, and they were keeping on sinning. But by the time you let a few generations of that sinning go on, God's going to have enough of it. It's going to be up to here. And he's going to say, that's all I'm going to take. I can't stand anymore. And you're going to pay for all that sin. The iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full. This is where people get the idea of a cup of iniquity. As much as I love props, I should have brought that with me, shouldn't I? A cup. And the cup is not yet full. But when the cup of iniquity gets so full and it overflows, God says, I'm going to pour it out and I'm going to throw it away because I'm just not going to take that anymore. Now, here's my proof. Exodus 23, verse 23 points out that the Amorites were among those who were in the land and they were to cast them out. My angel shall go before you and bring you into the Amorites, and I will cut them off. Exodus 23, verse 23. Now you go from Genesis 15 to Exodus 23, and then when you get to Numbers chapter 21, and you read later on in the chapter, you find that they put a whoop on and inhabited the cities of the Amorites. The cup of iniquity was full, ladies and gentlemen. God knew it back in the days of Abraham. He knew that they would keep on sinning. He knew that he would punish the sin, and they did not see it until it was too late. And God said, my children are now going to wreak my vengeance upon you. They're going to cast you out and take your cities, and you'll be gone. And that's exactly what happened. Now, my friend, you think God forgets? Oh, no. How do we prevent this then? If according to Genesis 15 and verse 16, sin builds up then how do we make sure that we do not fill our own cup of iniquity? Well, that means you've got to start early on by emptying the cup. You've got to get it out. You've got to make sure you root sin out of your life. You've got to do like back in the old Barney Fife shows. What did he tell Andy? Nip it. That's exactly right. He'd say, and you got to nip it in the bud. And that's exactly what we got to do today. Nip it. Well, how are we going to avoid sin then? If you want to nip it in the bud, it means that you want to avoid doing it to start with. My friends, let's go through some Bible, and we're going to go very quickly through this so that I can get to some other things. First of all, have an attitude of intolerance toward sin. 1 John chapter 2, verse 19. 1 John 2, verse 19. They went out from us, that they were not of us. So, John, they were among you? Yeah, they were among us, but they were not of us. If they had been of us, they would no doubt have continued with us. But they went out from us, that they might be manifest that they were not all of us. Some people never do have their heart in Christianity, do they? They never do really want to give up the sin. And if you don't want it, my friend, God is not going to make you to where you hang on with Him. John said they went out from us, but you could tell they're not of us. They had a tolerance to sin in their life. If you will want to serve God, then that means that you want to have zero tolerance, not to any sin whatsoever. Let me ask you this. Do you want a disease? Just name one. Do you want a disease? I don't want any of them. Do you? Not a single one. Do you want a bullet wound? I don't want a wound of any kind. I like my body hearty and whole. I don't like that. Do you want to lose a loved one? No. Well, somebody says it's just one. It's just one bullet. It's just one disease. You don't want any of those things. We don't want them because of the nature of them. If people saw sin just as disgusting as it is, you wouldn't want one of them either. And yet people act like, well, I'll give the Lord a bunch of stuff, but then that gives me some kind of right or leeway to have a sin. We're not trying to be Mr. Goody Two-Shoes and more holy than thou just because we say you don't want a sin. Are we people that are trying to lord our health over others just because we say we don't want you to have one disease? No. We want you to be healthy, and that means completely healthy. Therefore, we also say we want you to be holy, and that means completely holy. Be ye holy, for I am holy, saith the Lord. Consider with me. If a person starts down the road of letting a sin into their life willingly, then forever it's going to dominate your destiny. That means that that sin is something that allowed in your life will bother your conscience until your conscience gets hard. And the hardening of that conscience means that the next sin, it may be a similar sin that is the next higher sin in the line, or it could be that it is a totally different kind of sin, but your conscience was already hardened, you see. You'd gotten to where you weren't so tender anymore. You didn't feel it when you did something bad. And now you don't feel so bad when you do something else. And it goes on, and it gets worse and worse. And pretty soon you find out that you're just like those that John was talking about. You're there at church, but you're not of us. Not a single sin is acceptable. Somebody says, oh, Tim, you're preaching like those old preachers, and they didn't know the grace of God. I know what it says in Romans chapter 6. Shall we continue in sin that grace may abound? God forbid. Know ye not that if you continue in sin, that we've been made dead, of course, and you can't do that. He goes on to explain baptism and stuff, but the sermon's not about baptism. I better not continue with that. In Romans chapter 6, the answer is found in the question, shall we continue in sin that grace may abound? And obviously the answer is no. You just don't want it. Well, how can I nip it then? I don't want to sin. You've convinced me of that. How can I stop it before it gets started? You want to make sure it's hard to commit. Hard to commit. Heavily schedule yourself. I've talked to fellas before, and others speak to me and act as if, oh, he's a fine guy. He's a hard worker. If he's such a hard worker, how come he finds time to pick fights? If he's such a hard worker, how come he found time to cheat on his wife? If he's such a hard worker, then how come he's into this and into that? Sounds to me like he should have added another hour to a work in there. I get tired of people acting like, oh yeah, I'm just hard at doing this, that, or the other. If you schedule yourself heavy enough, my friend, where's the time for sin? You don't have any time for sin. Heavily schedule yourself. You need to forget that sin is pleasurable. Now it is. This is a chore, I'm telling you. But you need to forget that sin is pleasurable for a season. You say, well, how do you forget that, preacher? What you've got to do is to return to the state of innocency. Do you remember in Matthew chapter 18 and Matthew chapter 19, Jesus talked about the little bitty children. And he said, suffer the children to come unto me, for such is the kingdom of heaven. They are in a state of innocency. Now, you want to return yourself to that innocent state. Somebody says, well, how can I do that? I have known sin in my past. When you got a little child, that child gets in trouble a lot. Even when they're little bitty. They're down here, and that little baby is reaching up, and he's going to grab that, and he'll take off with it, and he'll tear it up. You don't know what he's going to do with it, right? Once that little toddler's got it, he's gone. And the next thing you know, this microphone, even the stand, the whole bit is just in pieces, laying all over the place. They can commit more destruction. What do? That little hand's reaching up at it? No. They hate you in that moment, don't they? They hate you and everything about you and what you stand for. I wanted that, and you won't let me have that. Guess what? It's probably not 5 minutes later, and what happened to that little one? They loved you to death. They forgot all about it, didn't they? They forgot all about it. Somebody says, Tim, I want to restore to the state of innocency. Jesus said, you go back to being like a child. When something happens, you just brush it off. Well, the devil's not going to let me worry about that. I'm going to get rid of that, and I'm going to move on with my life. Something happens that people will try to remind you of, then once again, you just, what are you talking about? If it's in my past, I put it back there. Why don't you leave it back there as well? I'm getting to where I can't even think about it. I don't even remember that. That's the way a little child is, aren't they? Every day is fresh and new. Every challenge is something that they approach just for what it is, right in front of them. Without deceit, without any ulterior motives, they take joy in the simple things of life. God gives us plenty of fun things to do in life. So what you have to do is return yourself to the time of innocency. A child finds fun in everything, don't they? They get the Christmas present, and what do they play with? Church? The box. That's right. The box it came in. Why? Because they're a child. It's just as fascinating as the gift that came in that box, and sometimes more so. Why can't we be like that? People close themselves off. They look for something in life that is different from what they're doing. Enjoy what you always have. Enjoy the good life that God has given you, my friend. Forget that sin is pleasurable for a season, because innocency and goodness are fun throughout life and all into eternity. There are specific ways to prevent sin inside God's church. In fact, this sermon I initially entitled, Sin, Keeping It Out of the Church. So you want to keep sin out of the church. How do you do that? You make sure that people fish for men. There's a guy that it used to be in the brotherhood. I take that back. Once you're a child of God, you're always going to be a child of God. Doesn't keep you from going to hell. But once you've obeyed the gospel, you're a child of God. But you may be an apostate, right? So he's gone apostate to the faith. But there was a story that Max Lucado, who writes a lot of books, and went liberal, real liberal, and he told a story one time that is still just as fitting as when he told it. I don't counsel you to check out everything he says. That's the reason I tell you about the other, but it's a good story from it. He said that there were some guys that went out on a fishing trip. And they decided this is going to be a fun place. There's going to be all kinds of fish over there in that lake. Let's rent us a little cabin over there. We'll take about a 3-day trip. Many of you may know about this story. It's real simple. They go out on the trip, and lo and behold, big storm rolls in. It's raining on that first day. They said, hey, it's going to be all right. We knew this might happen. So-and-so, you brought the cards, didn't you? Yeah. So-and-so, you brought the snacks, didn't you? Yeah. He says, I got everything else. This is going to be great. I was kind of tired from the trip anyway. We'll take this first day, take it easy. We'll eat our goodies, and we'll play us some cards. We'll have the biggest time in the world. And so they did. Second day, they got up and they looked outside, and it is raining cats and dogs, folks. I mean, you just can't go out and fish. The wind is boisterous, and the waves even are rolling on the lake. They cannot get out and fish. These fishermen look out and they say, well, we made it through the first day, we'll make it through the second day. The second day didn't go as smooth. It seems they weren't as hungry for their goodies. It seems that one person kept winning the card game and the others resented it. It seems that every time one of them opened his mouth, the other one was disturbed and couldn't get his rest. And then they got up on the third day. By the third day, when they looked out and it was still raining, every one of those guys was at each other's throat. They canceled the fishing trip, hardly made it back home without throwing punches at each other in the truck. Now, why did that happen? It happened for the simple reason that when fishermen don't fish, they fight. Church, what does that mean? We fish for men, don't we? We get souls. When you're not out here looking for souls, when you're not out here trying to find somebody in your family that needs the same salvation that you got, when you are not looking for a way to spread the influence of Jesus Christ and get them to worship God in spirit and in truth, then, my friends, that's where you get worried. That's where you get to bickering. It's where you get to disagreeing. People do that because when fishermen don't fish, they fight. Every church squabble comes because people lose sight of the evangelistic fervor that they once should have had, and because they get worried about side issues. In the early church, the church grew like gangbusters. The Roman Empire could not stop the church. They tried at different times. They killed them. They burned them. They fed them to wild beasts in the arena. They did all kinds of bad things to Christians. They could not stop Christianity. So what did they do? Around the year AD 300, Constantine said, let's accept Christianity. Let's pull it into us. And I declare, if they didn't, as soon as they did that, then what happened to the church? They started arguing. Well, you know, you don't quite agree like I do on the nature of Jesus. Exactly what is he? A demigod? Is he fully equal to the Father? What is he? And they got to arguing. Well, you don't quite like the way we structure the church over here at Rome. And I don't like the way you do it over there in Jerusalem. And I don't like the way you do it over there in Constantinople. And they started bickering about that. And when fishermen don't fish, then they get to fighting. As soon as they got through with being persecuted from without, when they were all one group together and trying to spread Christianity in any way they could, secretly, out in the open, if they could, in a place, maybe in hiding in somebody's basement, they were really on fire for teaching the gospel. But then all of a sudden, well, they're going to let us be out in the open. We don't have to worry about things anymore. So instead of encouraging brethren on how to die as a martyr or how to flee to the next city and spread the good cheer of Jesus Christ, let's just sit back on our laurels and start fussing. And that's exactly what they did. You can look it up in history. My friends, when fishermen don't fish, they fight. You keep your evangelistic fervor. You decide, I want to win a soul for Jesus. You know what the gospel plan of salvation is. God's law is not that complicated. Go out there and work for him. The church here has a great history of that. You all think that I wanted to go from a church that isn't all that much different from Willette over here down to Willette just so I could just have a change of venue? Not at all. I wanted to go to some place and do what I could to preach the gospel. I want to be the best thing that I can for the church here, and I hope that you all have the same attitude, that you want to be the best thing that you can for me, so that we develop together and do all we can in order to win souls over to Jesus Christ. You think of all the people out there right now. They're lost. Now, if you're not convinced of that, that's going to cut down on your religious fervor right there. But they are. They're lost. Sin has a hold of them in their lives. I talk to them. I see them. You see it in your own families. You see it among your neighbor. He lives without hope. He's dying on the inside. And sometimes we sit back then and we worry about, well, what's going on at church? This going on and that going on. And I don't see anything in the Bible about it, but it bugs me anyway. What ought to bug you is your neighbor lost. He's lost. Go help him. Do something for them. Some way, spread the cheer of Jesus Christ to them. And let them know that the Lord is best for them and will pull them out. And make sure that that is something they know and that they learn. evangelistic fervor will help you to nip sin in the bud. Well, preachers, Bible class teachers, the officers of the church, elders and deacons, we have our own part to blame in this. Sin has gotten in the church because, well, we haven't been focusing on what we ought to. I want to do a little pretend with you here for a moment. Let's say that this front pew has people in it. Now, nobody's here, so nobody can accuse me of picking on others, can they? It's empty. But let's pretend that there are some people sitting in these pews, okay? Now, over here, here's a young man. His friends casually use marijuana and perhaps even other drugs. Now, you think about that. It's easy to tell him, just like the campaign we've had ever since, say, the 1980s or something, just say no. Oh, yeah, that makes us feel good. Tell him that. Tell him just say no. But you know that's not so easy to do to a fella who doesn't have a full and fulfilled life, who doesn't see a particular reason to preserve the healthiness of his body, who doesn't see a particular group that he can run around with unless he's doing whatever it is they're doing, who finds them to be very comfortable in their own skin while he's always kind of nervous and feeling awkward. And yet you go to him and you say, "What's your problem, boy? Just say no." Well, you've got to get to the root of that. You've got to figure out, how can we stop this? How can he have a full and fulfilled life? Who does he open up to? Who is he palling around with? You've got to dig into these things. If you don't, and you sit back and say, "Well, the preacher preached on that the other day. He said not to do it. Well, they made a pronouncement at church. We're just not going to have that." Well, there you go. Well, that doesn't take it out of the reality, does it? It is what it is. The young man is still sitting there, and he's still struggling with it. Preacher's up here preaching. What is he saying? Why, he says, "I've got a nice sermon for you all tonight. I'm going to talk about sin, and I'm against it." So he makes his little acrostic, and he says, S-I-N, sin. Sin, S. It means it's stinky. I, that means another word for it is iniquity. N means never do it again. Now, y'all go out there. Don't sin. Well, that was cute, wasn't it? Now, I just say that mainly because I'm no good at acrostic sermons, so I can fuss at them. They are neat sometimes to remember things. I'm no good at them. But anyway, the point I'm making is that the preacher never really touched that young man's life. There's a young lady that's right there beside him. This young lady has started out in life, and everything was going along fine, but she has gotten with some friends. And those friends use sex in order to get boyfriends. And you're thinking about, all the different people that are around you and stuff, and you say, "Well, how can that young lady be helped?" And everybody says, "Oh, why don't you just live a pure life? Why don't you be ladylike?" Well, you have to let them know what ladylike is, don't you? Do they have a sense of independence about them? Do they have goals in life? Do they know what they are looking for in someone that they would like to spend the rest of their life with and be able to give their all to? If they don't realize these things, and if they don't have those goals, and if they don't feel independent, then they look at those friends that are behaving immorally and they say, "Well, they seem to be so happy. They have people around them all the time, and those of the opposite sex." Well, exactly what am I supposed to do to compete with that? You've got to get to the root of that. It's not a competition. It is a search for somebody to help you go to heaven. And until people look at it in that perspective, then that young lady is still going to go on with that kind of a problem. You got a couple sitting right there beside these young people. And that couple has started out and gotten married. Isn't that a beautiful thing? They've got them a new home. And along with the new home, they've got new jobs, and so therefore they had to have a new car. And really, the home is big because they're thinking in the future they might need to expand. And along with the home comes a big payment, doesn't it? Y'all know what I'm getting at? Young people all over the land nowadays have this kind of thing happen to them. The young couple started out, it has great debt. They spend their time, all their time, working. They need principles of prosperity. They need lessons on priority that specifically address their problem. And instead, what do? We see them once in a blue moon and say to them, "Why don't we see you more? Why ain't you been at church?" Well, the reason why they haven't been at church is because the church has not been dealing with their particular situation. We've got ourselves into a pickle here. We're up this far in debt. We don't know what to do with our lives, And instead of showing them from the book of Proverbs how to be prosperous, instead of showing them how to set priorities in life from God and getting just as specific as you need to on a personal and maybe sometimes in a public way, then that leaves them in the lurch. And you wonder, why are they not more spiritual? Why are they not godly? It's because the preacher's up there telling them, go to church, go to church, go to church. And they're sitting back here saying, oh man, pay the bill, pay the bill, pay the bill. And they don't know what to do with that. And there's a dichotomy there. And it's like he's not touching me because I've got some real problems in life and I can't even listen to more than 10 minutes of what he's saying. We've got ourselves in a difficulty here. Yeah. And there's some things in the Bible to help that. But you wouldn't know it from what's coming from the pulpit. And sometimes you wouldn't know it from what's coming from young couples' classes and all kinds of stuff. They'll sit in there just like we do in some other classes and kind of chase a rabbit and meander all over the Bible, instead of somebody speaking up and saying, hey, how did I get in the mess I'm in? Is there a word from God to help me out on this? And then for the teacher or preacher or whoever to say, well, I don't know, but if you'll tell me about it, and let's pray about it, and let's ask God for wisdom, and then let's go to his word and try to find the answer, okay? That is the only way that we're going to be able to solve these young people's problems. Beside that young couple, you've got an older person. Ladies, I'm going to pick on you because that's what's in my notes. You got an older lady. Now, this older lady, she's got a problem. Her problem is not the problem of the young man. Her problem is not the problem of the young girl. Her problem is not the problem of the young couple. This older lady's sitting there, and she's been there every time the door's open. And she's perfectly happy to be there. And that's great, isn't it? But, you know, she's been in the church maybe for 30, 40, 50 years or something, and the Bible still says the same thing to her that it always has in Titus chapter 2 and verse 4, that she ought to be teaching the young women. She never has gotten around to that. Instead, what do? We get the young women in the church a lot of times to do all the teaching, when the Bible specifically says the older women are the ones that are to teach the younger women. You don't sit back on your laurels when you decide I'm going to be a Christian. That person could go to church and be there every time the door is open, but without the principles of Jesus Christ showing them how to mature in the faith and pass on what they have learned, they are at the very least missing out on a star in their crown. And their soul may even be in jeopardy because they are not growing in the Lord, doing what he said, because there was a part of the Bible they just never cared to learn. And who's teaching it to them? Brethren, sin is something that is pervasive. It's something that starts out with people and builds with them. It is something that is involved in all demographics, every gender, every age group. Everybody in the church has to fight it, including yours truly. People that are coming into the church should know that becoming a Christian does not mean the end of your fight. It means that we got somebody on our side that is more powerful than the devil, and we win. Let's go to Luke chapter 14. I want to leave you with a passage there in Luke chapter 14. We're going to begin at verse 28. In Luke 14, verse 28, it says, which of you, intending to build a tower, sits not down first and counts the cost, whether he have sufficient to finish the tower, lest haply, after he has laid the foundation, he is not able to finish it. All that behold it will begin to mock him, saying, this man began to build, and he was not able to finish. What king going to war against another king doesn't first sit down and consult whether he'll be able to take 10,000 and meet him that comes against him with 20,000? Or else, while he's yet a great way off, he sends an ambassador, an embassage, and he desires conditions of peace. Likewise, whosoever of you does not forsake all that he has cannot be my disciple. My brethren, what Jesus taught here is very clear. We have too many coming into the Lord's church who did not count the cost. I am against the devil, they say. I am too. But I know that he's somebody I'm going to have to fight my whole life. Did you think you'd come into the church and then everything's just like, wow, the weight of sin is lifted and the devil will never come after me again? He came after Jesus in Matthew chapter 4 when Jesus was tempted, didn't he? But that doesn't mean that the devil left him permanently. The Bible says that the devil left him for a season, for a time. My friends, He was there again at the crucifixion, wasn't he? He was there prodding on Judas to take and have Jesus crucified. He was there thinking he was dooming the world by removing the Son of God and the influence he had over him and his demons. Little did he know that he was simply furthering the plans of God and making it to where Jesus Christ would take away all sin forevermore. My friends, Luke chapter 14 says if you're going to come to the Lord, you are more than welcome. But count the cost. Figure out that your life is going to be a challenging life. The world around us is given to the ways of the devil. We know that we are of God, the Bible says, and all the world is lost. What about them? I'm not talking about any individual person. I just mean that the world out there is going to try to drag you down because whether they know it or not, the devil has sway over them. They're following the broad path that leads to destruction. Jesus is going to take you to the narrow and straight way that goes on to heaven. But the only way you can get there is to figure that if I make this commitment to Jesus tonight, then that commitment is going to be one for today, for tomorrow, for next year, for next decade, and until the Lord calls me home. I will never forsake him. And whenever I run into problems, I'll know who I can go back to. And I will ask God to nip it, to stop it, whenever I mess up. And I will plead unto the Lord that he empties out the cup of iniquity so that I might start anew. Cleanse me again. And just like David prayed unto God, restore unto me your Holy Spirit. Make it right, God. And he'll do that. Have you been burdened by the weight of sin? Make sure that you don't let it go on. It's only going to get worse. If you don't come back to God tonight, it's going to build and it's going to hurt you more down the road. If you will come back unto the Lord tonight, then he will make sure with you that it's cut out of your life and that you're found new and free once again. Don't you want to be able to go home and say that? I don't have any sin on me. God has taken it away. Don't you want to lay your head down on your pillow tonight and know I'm saved? I want that feeling. I want that knowledge. And I believe you do too. That if for someone who never has obeyed the gospel, Jesus is not your personal Savior, my friend. You need to make him so tonight by obedience unto his gospel. He that believeth and is baptized shall be saved. If you're here tonight and sin has burdened you and it's got you down, do like others. Turn from the ways of evil. All those recently have been restored. Let's pray together about it. And God will restore you once again and give you the innocence even of a little child. And he'll receive you as a child later on into heaven. If there's any way we can help you with that, won't you come as we stand and sing?